Well, thanks for finding my class today. We're studying personalities in the Bible. You're going to like today's personality. The city of Susa was the equivalent of Washington, D.C. in their day. The nation of Persia was ruled from Susa because it was the capital and the seat of government. And from that epicenter, they held all their power. Persia ruled the world in the ancient world. We've been studying personalities in the Bible. Today, I'm going to zero in on a man, and this man was really a nobody. He wasn't a king. He had no privileged lineage. He wasn't a businessman. He had no prestige. Poorly educated, lived as a single man, no family of his own. Don't know his age. I'm going to say he was 60 years of age. His name is very easy to pronounce. It has a nice ring to it. His name was Mordecai. You ever heard of him? Well, you're going to in a minute. He only appears in one book in the Bible, and it's the book of Esther. I'll read it for you. Esther chapter 2, verse 5. He's going to do more for that nation of Israel than any other man that came before him. Let me read. Now there lived in the city of Susa, the capital, a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin. He was named Mordecai, whose family had been carried to Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, years before. What was Mordecai's job, living there in Susa? Well, he worked for the government. He worked for the government of Persia. And he was on the king's payroll. We call him today probably a civil servant. Imagine a Jew working for a pagan king. And he worked at the city gate. Part customs officer, probably part member of the Secret Service, keeper of the peace, himself being a peace officer, and he was a bodyguard to the government officials coming and going through that city gate. Mordecai, he made the pages of history by something he did, but he did it all behind the scene. It happened at home. I'll read it for you. Esther chapter 2, verse 7. Such a simple event. Most wouldn't even know it happened. If you were living on his street in Susa, you didn't even know what went on in that house. Mordecai, the Bible says, had raised his cousin, Hadassah, otherwise known as Esther. Since she had no father and she had no mother, the girl had a good figure and she had a very beautiful face. After her parents died, she became an orphan. Mordecai, seeing that little orphan, adopted her. If you look closely at the name Hadassah, it comes from the Hebrew word myrtle. Myrtle, according to the rabbinical commentaries, implies righteousness. Well, that's a good name for Esther, because her stepfather, Mordecai, he was righteous. And she's going to follow in his example. His righteous stand is what the book of Esther is all about. That little adopted girl belonging to Mordecai is going to change Jewish history. And she's going to change it forever. So, sit back. Let me tell you the story. Here's my outline. 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready, and 4 to go. The outline of that, what I've just said, is really an old children's nursery rhyme back in the 1800s in England. Elvis Presley, he made it famous when he came up with his song, Blue Suede Shoes. Anyway, one for the money. Mordecai, he never told anyone his heritage. He was a Jew, living among Gentiles. No one knew that. And he taught Esther, that little orphan girl that he had adopted. She had to do the very same thing. No one ever knew that she belonged to Abraham. Just look at the Babylonians. You know, these Persians, they didn't require their conquered peoples to give up their gods. If you were conquered and you were taken back to Persia, keep your God. Didn't bother them. And remember that the Persians, they were polytheistic. That meant they had all kinds of gods. But remember, to the Jew, they only had Yahweh, one God. That's it. A Persian, he could sacrifice to his cow. He could pray to the moon. He could have child sacrifice. He practiced all kinds of things. But for the Jew, it was only God. They only had one God. And he was their God of righteousness. That's all they had. In other words, one for the money. At the city gate, Mordecai, on his job, witnessed two events. The first one was an assassination attempt. Mordecai confronted two men. They were spies. They had infiltrated the defenses of Persia, and they were plotting to kill the king. Mordecai carefully watched their behavior, and he reported them to the authority. Those two men were arrested, they were convicted, and they were both put to death. Every detail was written in the government log by the government lawyers. And Mordecai, he was credited with the discovery. And his name was recorded right beside all these events. But it was never reported publicly, only on paper. One for the money. That was the first event. Here's the second one. And the second one is, to me, very disturbing. It involves Mordecai himself. King Xerxes, he elevated a nobleman in his court to become his Secretary of State. And it was a seat that was higher than any other authority that was ever given out to any other noble. His name was Haman. He possessed a very angry personality. The guy was a bit warped. He hated Jews. He was an Amalekite. They were the ancient enemies of the Hebrews, and when the children of Israel left their bondage in Egypt, who was the first enemy they met after they left Egypt? The Amalekites. And the Jews defeated them. Haman, he had been taught by his parents as a child, if you see a Jew, kill him. Get even. And if there are more than one, annihilate them all. They're not a chosen people. Root them out. Destroy them. That's what Haman's personality was. Now you know why he was so warped. What do you think he's going to do with that personality? Well, watch. Haman, after his appointment to the Secretary of State, he would ride on the king's private horse, the king's horse, his best horse, throughout the capital of Susa. And he made all those that watched him ride by on that horse, dressed in his beautiful robes, they had to bow down and worship him. He gets to the city gate. That's where Mordecai is. He watched Haman pass. He would not bow. Everybody else did. Mordecai didn't bow. He did not. Haman saw this. And it's recorded. I'll read it for you in Esther 3, verse 5. Here's what it says. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down and pay him homage and honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, I wonder how he knew that. The Bible doesn't tell us how. But he obviously knew that. He scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, all the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Why is that? Have you ever wondered that? How can anyone in the entire human family, our whole human race, how can you annihilate another people simply because of their ancestry? Well, he did. That's called ethnic cleansing. One for the money. Okay, now we come to two for the show. Now the fun starts. In our drama, two highlights are going to unfold in this book, in the book of Esther. One is going to involve this little grown-up orphan girl of Mordecai, Esther by name. The other involves Haman and the writing of a brand new law in the courts of the Pentagon of Susa. First, the orphan girl, Esther, Mordecai's adopted little daughter. Xerxes the king, he wanted to find a queen just for himself. He's a bachelor. And he ordered a beauty contest to be entered for the entire country. And the most beautiful virgins from every province were to send or be sent to Susa for the contest. The judge of the contest is going to be the king himself. The event was going to be held, and all the beautiful maidens, they were all to come to the city. All the young beauties of Persia. And they were all pampered. They cared for by the king's secretary, all equally. Nothing was spared. Every girl had the same preparation. Finest perfume, most expensive robes, best high heels, flowers, jewelry, finest hairdresser. Miss Persia is going to be crowned not for a day, but for a whole lifetime. She's going to be on the royal throne as the king's queen and ruler in all the kingdom. That little orphan girl, Esther by name, she's now a beautiful young maiden. She's grown up. And guess what? She's going to be one of the candidates. Verse 8, Esther 3. When the king's order had been proclaimed, Esther was taken to the king's palace, and she pleased him and won his favor and was crowned queen of the kingdom of Persia. Now, just a side note. Verse 10. Esther had not revealed her nationality or family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Can you see what's coming? This beautiful girl is now going to be the queen of all of Persia. And nobody knows her lineage except her and her stepfather Mordecai. Mordecai had hid his heritage, and he had taught his young orphan daughter, Esther, to do the same. Now watch what happens. Esther is queen. Haman is appointed Secretary of State. He has a private audience with the king, and he's seething with anger. Mordecai at the city gate, watched Haman come, and his behavior made Haman outraged. He refused to prostrate himself before him. Haman on his royal horse saw this, and he resolved to get even. He wanted to kill Mordecai. But it's worse than that. He resolves to kill all the Jewish exiles throughout the Persian Empire. He wants the king's permission to carry out that plan. So, Esther 3, verse 8 and 9, here it comes. I'll read it. Here's what Haman said. There's a certain people, your majesty, dispersed among all your peoples in every province, and they keep themselves separated from you. Their customs are different from those of all other peoples in your nation, and they don't obey the king's laws. It's not in the king's best interest to tolerate any of them. And if it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king for the royal treasury if you do. Do you know how much money 10,000 talents of silver is back in their day? In our time, that's worth 20 million bucks. This Haman, he must have been a bit of an oligarch to exterminate every Jew in Persia for the price of 20 million bucks. That man, he had to be vile to the bone. Well, history has others like him. Remember, these are God's children. These are God's holy priesthood. Do you think he's going to get away with that? Do you think God's going to let him do that? King Xerxes, he agreed. Verse 10, Esther 3. The king, the Bible says, agreed, telling him, keep your money, but go ahead. Do as you like with these people, whoever you think they are, and do what's best. The edict went out by the king's speediest couriers, signed and sealed with the king's ring. And then the king and Haman, they sat down for a drinking spree. One for the money, two for the show. Let me tell you about a modern day Esther. This little girl I'm going to tell you about is 9 years old when she lost her father. He died of cancer. It left her and her mother penniless. They were broke. To survive, they moved to a very depressed neighborhood to live with the in-laws. She got a part-time job in high school as a copy girl for the local newspaper. She saved every dime. She wanted to attend university after high school. She wanted to pursue her dream. Do you know what her dream was? She wanted to become a writer. But when she got to high school, her marks cratered. She failed at school. Her dream was dashed. Her guidance counselor advised her she had never become a writer. A local newspaper took a chance, and they asked her to write obituaries in their paper. When her mother found out that she had this part-time job, she got ridiculed. And her mother told her, "You're not going to make enough money to feed the cat." At age 20, she was diagnosed with a very severe kidney disorder. If she worked at all, she was going to work from her house. She got married after high school. She graduated. And she had 2 kids. She didn't let hardship get to her. She began writing humorous articles all about life. To her, something happened. She was shocked and quite surprised that people began to read her humor. Her articles caught on. And before long, she was writing the most widely syndicated columns for the whole nation. She even ended up worldwide. Readers would hang on every quote from her pen, and they would hang her quotes on the refrigerator door. Let me give you an example. Here are some examples of her humor. And her humor had some great definitions. Here's her definition of exercise. I've exercised with women so thin that the buzzards wouldn't even follow them to their car. Here's another one on friendship. A friend will tell you, she saw your old boyfriend. He's now a priest. Here's one of a definition on husbands. God created man, but I could do better. Here's a definition of housework. My second favorite household chore is ironing. My first, it's hitting my head on the top bunk. Well, she wrote a couple of books. One book is entitled, The Grass is Always Greener Over the Septic Tank. Second book she wrote, When You Look Like Your Passport Photo, It's Time to Go Home. 1991, she got cancer. 1993, both kidneys shut down. In April 96, she was rushed to the San Francisco University Medical Center on April the 22nd, 1996, because of severe complications. Irma Bombeck died of heart failure. She was 69. At age 9, she lost her father. At age 69, the world lost one of its most compelling writers, who was told, change careers, you'll never make it. Esther, the little adopted orphan girl, growing up in Susa. She probably thought, I'll never be anything. Who'd ever marry me? Mordecai is a wonderful stepfather, but he's not my parents. I told you, 1 for the money, 2 for the show. When you come back next week, I'm going to give you the other side of that. 3 to get ready and 4 to go. Like Irma Bombeck, Esther is going to become one of the greatest ladies that our Bible writes about. I want you to come back and hear it. A very compelling story. For a girl that started out thinking she'll never make it. But in the end, she becomes one of the most compelling ladies that this world has ever known. Come on back and I'll tell you about it. See you then.